Thank you very much. Before we move on, Tom, when we were rehearsing up here before, we had this row of lights on. Is there any way of getting those back on? Otherwise, my flute players will be yelling at me. And there's nothing worse than flute players yelling at you. Okay, first of all, welcome and thank you for being here. I'm Jeff Ford, and I'm the new director of this marvelous, marvelous ensemble, and I really think that the Sandwich Weather Gods aren't too happy to have me because we got rained out in July and we're almost getting snow down here, but despite all of that, we're going to have a great, great concert for you here this afternoon. That first piece that we played is called Rhapsodic, essay by Cacavas, and he, for most of us, is known as an educator and writer of music for various level school band ensembles, but he kind of lived a second life and wrote a lot of music early in his life for primarily television shows. And I was doing some research and surprised to find out that Kojak, if you can remember, I'm kind of showing my age, but if you remember Kojak or Hawaii Five-0, all right, very, very, very memorable music. All right, he's also responsible for that. And so that's what I can tell you about this gentleman, and that's a great segue for moving to our next piece of music here, which also features music written for television and movies. A gentleman who probably is more familiar to most of you, a guy by the name of Henry Mancini. My introduction to him as a saxophone player was the Pink Panther theme, played by Plas Johnson, one of the most iconic saxophone solos probably ever played anywhere in the universe. That is not in this medley because this medley was created prior to the Pink Panther, but we are going to play here pieces of music that include The Baby Elephant Walk, Moon River, and the John Wayne Western African movie, Atari. Okay, so I hope you enjoy this. This is the music of Henry Mancini. One of my very favorite pastimes is listening to the music that accompanies television shows, and you want to know what some of the best ones are? Gunsmoke and Bonanza. I'll tell you what, the music on Gunsmoke and Bonanza is spectacular, especially if you want to hear harmonies. It's alto flutes and contrabass clarinets and bass trombones and the instruments that you rarely get an opportunity to hear. Trust me, it's worth it. Lunch hour, 12 to 1, you can usually find it somewhere. Okay. We're going to move on now and play a very different kind of piece of music. This is the most modern, by date, piece of music that we're going to play for you today. And probably, just in terms of compositional process, also the most modern piece. It really explores some different tonalities and textures, and it's not just major, minor chords and do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, like a lot of music that we play. This is a piece of music entitled With Quiet Courage, and it's written by Larry Daehn. Researching the composer, I certainly understand why I was attracted to the piece. He was, for many years, the band director in New Glarus, Wisconsin, at the high school. And for those of you familiar with New Glarus, there's very few places in the world that are as fun to be as New Glarus. You can drink spotted cow and eat Swiss cheese like 24 hours a day for 4 or 5 days. It's a spectacular place. On a more somber side, the title here, With Quiet Courage, is a piece of music that was written and dedicated to his mother, who had some very serious health problems during her life and persevered, and thus the title of the piece of music, With Quiet Courage. So we'd like to play it for you now. I hope you enjoy it. very, very beautiful piece of music. I'm going to look him up. He's apparently still alive next time I get to New Glarus, which I hope is soon. Cindy. All right. We're now going to play the oldest piece on the concert. And this is interesting music to play just because of the history of a lot of old music. This is a composer by the name of Gottlief Muffat. I'm going to use some notes here so I don't miss anything. And he was writing music in the late Baroque period, early part of what we call the Viennese classical period. So basically middle of the 18th century, 1740, 1750, 1760. In Europe, obviously. And composers at this time, you know, we think of them now as famous individuals and put them on these pedestals and play their music. But the reality was, if you were a musician or composer during this period of time, you were basically a servant to an aristocrat, all right? And you were, for all practical purposes, a living, breathing radio. I mean, it was your job to provide music on a daily basis for whatever your employer desired, whether it was company or dancing or whatever it happened to be. Let's understand we had no movies, we had, you know, very limited other forms of entertainment. So these composers were extremely prolific. They wrote hundreds and hundreds of pieces of music in many cases. And this is one of those gentlemen. He's a composer that's often overlooked during this period because Bach was right in here and early parts of Mozart were right in here, and obviously those are two people who historically have claimed a lot more chronological fame. But this gentleman was the court composer in the Emperor of Vienna, all right, and he basically wrote music and played the organ. Okay, this a piece of music would have originally been composed for and performed on the organ, all right, and then later transcribed, which is the word we use to identify being rearranged for instruments. So that's what we're going to play for you now. So imagine yourself being in powdered wigs and carrying on and dancing around the parlor where this music is being played. When I was learning about this in college, it was difficult to kind of grasp the period of time and understand the historical place of all of this music, because I played the saxophone, and basically everything we did stuck in the 20th century, all right, so I had no real practical knowledge of this music. And I took a lot of American history classes in school, but obviously we never studied European history. So I used to start comparing European history to American history, and if you do that, we were almost fighting a Revolutionary War when this piece of music was written. So it's amazing for me to think things this grand and glorious were going on, and we were playing fifes and drums and chasing Indians and trying to figure out how to overtake the British monarchy. But anyway, that's kind of puts it all in a nutshell. I hope you enjoy this piece of music. It's called Sarabande and Fantasia. Thank you very much. It's a neat, fun piece of music to play. There were no wind bands around at the time of that piece of music being written, so if we want to explore music that predates the middle of the 19th century, that's exactly what we have to do, is beg, borrow, and steal from other types of music. Because in the 1700s, flutes didn't have keys, and clarinets weren't even around, and French horns didn't have valves, and saxophones were eons away from being around. So instruments were in very, very, very archaic forms, and so composers chose not to write for them typically. That's why we have so much music that's for keyboard and strings from that period of time. But we get past it by doing that. We're going to do some more of it right now. Again, I'm going to use some notes here. This next piece of music, I think, is one of the coolest challenges that we had for the concert that we're playing. This is a piece that comes from a style of music called program music or programmatic music, which dates from the middle to late 19th century, so the 1800s. And it's basically music that is descriptive. All right, so this is music that's composed to tell a story, to paint a picture, to leave a mood, to create an image. It doesn't use traditional methods. We don't use do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. We don't use traditional sonata forms or theme and variation forms. The composer is free to just choose his pitch vocabulary and his rhythm and whatever else he wants to just try to describe this visual imagery that is in his mind, or her mind, okay? Very cool concept for this period of time because, again, we didn't have television. You know, now music is very visual. Would you agree? We have Walt Disney to thank for that, and Michael Jackson to thank for that. You know, I mean, now when we listen to music, most of the time we are seeing something as well, but not the case here. All right, so we're going to play a piece of music that is, again, historically very significant. It was written originally for the keyboard and then very quickly arranged for the orchestra, and then again adapted, transcribed, our new vocabulary word for the day, to the concert band. All right, and this is a one movement of a 10-movement piece. The piece collectively is called Pictures at an Exhibition. It's written by Modest Mussorgsky, a Russian composer. And Tom, when we have a slide here, we can show you what we're talking about here. So we are going to play one movement from this 10-movement piece, and it's called The Great Gate of Kiev. And it's our composer's visual imagery of this particular painting, all right, by a Russian composer, or excuse me, a Russian artist. And we'd like to play it for you now. It uses some interesting textures and sounds, and again, things that are not, to most of our ears, traditional, but very cool. And I thought maybe being able to see what you're hearing might make it more Michael Jackson-esque. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what we're going to try, okay? Here we go. The Great Gate of Kiev.